Hi friends, host Eric here. Talking with French people here in my garage. Not the old garage, the new garage. The garage I've lived in, well, I mean now it's all nice and tidy and everything. I'm wasting time. This video is called Everything You Need to Know About Cognitive Functions in Just 10 Minutes. First of all, what is a cognitive function? Why should you care? And what variety of ways has it been expressed for general knowledge and consumption? Well, we could look at a cognitive function as a manner of attention. We could use it as we could look at it as an information metabolizer. We could look at it as a function, namely something one does to change existing parts into a whole. We could look at it as personality type, which is a different way of looking at it, right? It's saying that these are the components of people who represent types. That's, in my mind, backwards. You could look at it additionally as simply a taxonomy of behaviors, even if you wanted to, or displays. So how should you look at it? Well, in my opinion, the best way to look at it is as manners of attention that are paired. So there are 4 pairs of manners of attention. Now, it's possible to spend one's attention on the fact, well, let's just say there are 4 pairs of manners of attention, okay? And the key differentiations in manners of attention are intuition, sensing, thinking, and feeling. It's one way to break it apart. But another way to break apart this is to simply say that we experience things directly. That would be sensing, which is to say we can experience, for example, pain. If we experience physical pain, it's an experiential phenomenon. If we experience emotional pain, it's an experiential phenomenon. But they occur according to different rules, so to speak. If I were to stab myself in the leg, I'd experience physical pain. It would have meaning that the stabbing in the leg would generate meanings to be dealt with, such as, why did Eric do that? And what's going to happen now? And is this going to impact his leg's viability long term? Etc., etc. However, you cannot cause physical pain with meaning. You can cause emotional pain with meaning. If I learned my dog died, and whether or not I witnessed it at all, had any experience of it at all, if I learned that the dog's status has changed from living to dead, I will likely grieve dramatically. And that pain follows from meaning in the opposite way that meaning follows from physical pain. So we see there are 2 kinds of experiencing of pleasure and pain. One being a physical component, a sensory component, one being a emotional component. So when we're looking at our ways of taxonomying these manners of attention, we can divide it in a couple of different ways. We can say sensing, and we can talk about how there's introverted sensing, that is to say one's relationship to the feelings of one's own body, being hungry, being thirsty. This is in the moment. Or we can think about sensing as external, noticing movement of an animal in the bushes that you want to hunt, or seeing an attractive female across the room and going, I'm going to go hit on her, or something like that. So we've got this situation where we do know for a fact that people have sensory input that they process in some fashion, which is to say you can pay attention to what's going on out in front of you in your eyes, or you can kind of be lost in your head and not be seeing what's going on in front of your eyes. You can pay attention to the fact that you're hungry, or you could be paying attention to something else. Maybe you're worried about the person across the room. When we understand that cognitive functions are simply the naturally occurring reality of people's inability to concurrently pay attention in 2 different ways, then it makes sense that people would fall into types, provided that these functions existed in pairs on axes, which they naturally are going to do because of the relationship between the types of manner of attention that are being expressed by a given function. So we've talked about sensing. With intuition, it's a little harder to understand, but not much. It just says that intuition is how individuals know or conclude things despite having incomplete information. For example, let's say I was walking into an area of the woods where supposedly I'd heard that there was buried treasure, and I saw a sign that said the buried treasure is over that way, and it pointed an arrow to the left. Well, after standing there and thinking about it for a while, I'd probably conclude that the best place to dig would be underneath the sign. It would not be to follow the instructions of the sign. I would have intuited this, so to speak. All the data in front of me suggests that would not be the place to dig. In fact, all the data in front of me is explicitly telling me dig someplace else. So that's why I might intuit from a motivational perspective that somebody's put this sign there. Charlie doesn't actually want you to find the treasure. Of course, it would depend on context, but that's an example of an intuitive leap where you're not really given enough information to draw that conclusion, but you think it's probably right anyway. Okay, so when we're talking about people who are intuitive, then they're intuitive in one of two ways. They either, the single best course of action or the single rightest answer comes to them after some period of time of simply letting what the data they've perceived, letting that data process. And then their introverted intuition tells them what the single right answer is. So that would be kind of an example of the sign kind that I gave right there. It's an example of introverted intuition. Standing there and going, and then not really thinking it all the way through, but going, I bet it's underneath this sign. What a good diversionary trick that would be. If I were a smart person burying it, I might do just that. So, that would be an introverted intuition solution. If I were an extroverted intuition solution, wouldn't be well suited for that problem, but it might be well suited for a problem with more variables, where you have to consider ways to manipulate variables against each other that might produce different outcomes, and how one might be desirable or otherwise. Same with conclusions. So this intuitive process is one of either generating lots of possibilities or being able to pick out the best possibility from a set of possibilities. And those two kinds of intuition are called extroverted and introverted intuition. Introverted being the single course, extroverted being the multiple courses. But we've talked about sensing, we've talked about intuition. Let's shift gears here a bit and talk about epistemologies and action functions. So yes, we can split up the manners of attention into sensing and intuition like that, but we could also split them up according to what they do as manners of attention. We could talk about epistemologies. That's ways of knowing things. There are two epistemological functions. That's introverted sensing, which we already talked about, and introverted intuition, which we've already talked about. They're both epistemological functions, which means they provide you knowledge as opposed to, say, a tool that is used to draw conclusions from something that's still open to discursive examination. If, in fact, you already know something, then you know it. You don't have to worry about it. You treat it as though it were true without thinking about if it is true. And introverted sensors, because they know first and foremost as their epistemological approach the subjective experience. They know their own physical well-being. They know their own schedule. They know their little objects they got around them. They know what they like, what feels good, what's comfortable. And when they go to express objective knowledge, things they've learned, they understand them as things they've learned, as part of their ontological growth over time, and they see their identity as at the front end of a succession of events trailing behind them, the linear progression of which comprises a whole, the individual person. Introverted intuition as an epistemological function functions differently in that it says, I'm going to assume that I am deducing rules that are true about the world from data outside of myself in the world. I'm going to position my knowledge in terms of algorithms and understandings of the way the world works that I fundamentally believe to be external to myself. Are they external to the self? No, it's just that the introverted intuitor doesn't catalog their understandings via personal experience examples. One thing that introverted sensors are much more likely to do than introverted intuitors is to generalize hastily from single examples of people's behavior. Well, Joe acted like that one time, so he's the person who acts like that. Or potentially in other situations besides behavior as well, I guess, but really I just want to focus on the behavior there. So introverted intuitors are not as likely to be hasty generalizers. They are, however, likely to have drawn conclusions that may not withstand scrutiny and be quite convinced of them because their introverted intuition tells them so strongly that what they perceive to be the true conclusion based on their knowledge of how things are in the world, that they just understand. It's not something they've learned. That based on that, they just know it's true. Introverted intuitors can get stuck in that for a bit. But those are both epistemological functions. You only have one that you use actively as in your conscious cognitive function stack. They say an MBTI, and that's Myers-Briggs, and it's one of multiple systems that deal with the cognitive functions. Now, extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing, those are both action functions. Extroverted intuition, like introverted intuition, is objective and deals with the world as though it weren't linked to the subject, as though I didn't have to experience it for things to be true about it to me. In reality, if you want to get philosophical about it, it's not really the case. But the point is, for ENTPs and INTPs, INFPs, and ENFPs that use extroverted intuition in the first two slots, we take an approach where our action is meaning making, is creating, or ideation. So the extroverted intuitor in the dominant slot, ENTP, when first I approach something, my first order of business is to generate ideas about it, or generate language about it, make observations, challenge assertions, stuff like that. So that's not real action as we normally think of it, but it absolutely is on an ideational plane. And somebody who uses extroverted sensing, SE, is going to do the equivalent on a physical plane, which is to say, they're going to say, enough empty talk. I'm tired of this nonsense, blah, 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 blah. We need to do this do shit right now. We need to take action. That's extroverted sensing. So we've talked about the sensings and the intuitions now from a couple of different angles. Let's look at the judging functions, as they're sometimes called, feelings and thinkings. There's introverted thinking, which is about conditional logic, basically. It's about consistency within a validity framework as understood through conditionality webs of logic. TE is about being efficient in attaining the outcomes you're looking for in as few steps as possible through a planning framework. So T is doing things smart, TI is saying things smart, basically. TI and TE can cooperate with one another because often the deductively correct choice is the same as the most efficient choice, provided the goals are the same. But one of the big challenges in terms of bridging communication gaps between people who use TIFE and people who use FITE is that people who use TIFE are fixated on the fairness both of the comparison and of the application of the process, whereas the FITE people are primarily focused on the outcome. So, and the fairness thing is only an issue to the extent that it's an issue or interferes with the attainment of the goal that they want. If they can't attain that goal without being unfair, then chances are they'll be unfair unless they think they can mitigate that. There's not necessarily a strong belief inherently that the reciprocal burdens test, namely that if you're going to apply that rule to you, I should be able to apply it to you. If you can apply that rule to me, I should be able to apply it to you as well, which works in rhetorical exchange and works in ideational TI framework stuff really well. It seems an unnecessary impedance to getting shit accomplished in the TE frame. So the reason TI and FE go together is because FE is another way to objectively, like TI, approximate the experiential reality that we all manifest as our existences, and say, here, let's define these things as objects. She's mad at me. It's not a very precise thing, but it's a label and a status I can afford and work with. It makes it TI usable, because remember, TI is looking for consistency. So if, well, she's mad, that's why she hit you. Well, if that's okay for her to be mad and hit me, then isn't it okay for me to be mad? If I'm mad, that I get to hit her? And they say, oh, no. Well, then it fails the reciprocal burdens test, and TIFE will reject that. So FE, because it's dealing with other people's emotions, necessarily has to approximate them into time objects or sets of words, labels, statuses, assumptions, things we know and things we affirm and things we assert that allow us to work with the perceptions of other people and achieve the results that we're looking for, while maintaining a consistency framework in the overall understanding of things. So those judging functions, the feeling functions and the thinking functions, could also be divided in terms of the introverted adjudication functions and the extroverted interface functions. FE and TE, or extroverted feeling and extroverted thinking, are interface functions. Interface functions are those functions which allow an individual to express that modality of attention by either putting, getting, or receiving information. It's a hybrid kind of function that allows you to express it in a number of different display patterns, depending on how the individual prioritizes that put, get, or receive triumvirate of subfunctions that comprise both FE and TE. Now note, if you apply your interface function as a tool function, let's say, and it's FE, then your polar will be TE. If your tool function is TE, then your polar will be FE. What that means is, if you are using one of those interface functions as a tool function in the second slot, then your blind spot, what you're unable to do, is the other interface function. And this is part of the mutual exclusivity engine that ultimately makes cognitive functions a fairly airtight case to make. In other words, the framework of cognitive functions can successfully subsume whatever arguments you're making, because it returns the focal point of the analysis to the subject where it belongs. Because, in other words, people present ideas as though they want them to be presented and understood and critiqued as objects independent of anybody making the statements. The statements ought to be critiqued on their merits alone, and it's a perfectly good, reasonable, logical argument to make. However, it's not actually accurate when you're talking. I mean, it's a smaller frame of reference. It's a smaller frame of reference when you're talking about any specific argument, because cognitive functions allows you to say, oh, well, that argument that you're making is representative of this value pair on these axes, and these values representing you because of this stack configuration of your cognitive functions. And if I wanted to appeal to you, I would present this kind of argument, and if I wanted to piss you off, I'd present this kind of argument, and if I wanted to agree with you, I'd present this kind of argument, because this is your cognitive function state. This is what you'd be more or less responsive to. Now, at that point, you've dismantled the disputative nature of whatever the affirmation negation process is being directed towards in that moment, because you said, let's meta up a level and point out the fact that these ideas we're arguing about are both simply representative of our manners of attention: habitual, preferred, naturally occurring, reflexive, intrinsic, whatever word you want to use to source them. They are reflections of and highly effective predictors of what's going to work in terms of argumentation and talking and communication in general. Okay, so the introverted judging functions are basically just that. They're how you know whether something's legitimate or not. For me, if it's not logically consistent, because it's my tool function, I don't tend to view it as legitimate at all. Because the alternative of that is to be subjective and say, it doesn't matter if it's logically consistent. It's important to me, it's authentically important to me, therefore that's what matters. That would be an introverted feeling approach. you'll note you can't prioritize one or the other of those without deprioritizing the alternative. Why? Well, because TI means I'm going to eliminate as much as possible from the equation the individual people involved, reduce the situation to a set of concrete, rules, conditionals, like, well, they say let's punish that guy because of this warrant, this justification here. And then let's remove who the guy is, whether it's somebody who's well liked or somebody who's hated, and just focus on if we applied that universally, how would it go? So that's a objective approach where you're trying to remove the subject from the equation. You're trying to remove the individuality, the particularism from the equation, and say, to be fair, we have to make sure that whatever it is we do, it passes the reciprocal burdens test. On the other hand, FI says whatever we do, I have to make sure it's authentic to myself. If it's not really what I want, if I don't really feel what I'm doing here, and it doesn't matter if it's fair, it doesn't matter if it passes any sort of test, it's the wrong choice for me, and that's what really matters. And if I'm smart, I'm going to do it in a way that gets what I need and what I want, and not what generalizes well. That's just an approximate idea anyway, and why the fuck should we all have to live by your general rules? That would be an FI approach. If a person were to try to master both, what that would mean is they'd be in constant battle with themselves over which framework to prioritize. If somebody were really ambifunctional or something, then it would render them useless in adjudicating things. They wouldn't be good at either. They'd simply be a morass of self-defeating, mutually exclusive impulses. So, what's the takeaway from all this? I don't think I really gave you everything you need to know about cognitive functions in 10 minutes. I think it's been longer than 10 minutes already. Anybody else? Let me see if Zach has got anything to say. I muted you a while back, Zach, because you're making shit tons of background noise. I don't know if you've been saying anything or not, but I'm going to unmute you now. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, the self-defeating impulses or whatever is, I feel like that's a goal of a lot of like Eastern thought. Like the person you're describing is almost exactly like the sage laid out in the Tao Te Ching.
Right, which
where
is
there's
why...
a sort of piece to having to being ambifunctional or whatever.
Well, I like to shit on Easternism in general, because of course it's nonsense. First of all, it's NI biased. Your Eastern religions, they are an NI-SE framed understanding of enlightenment, actualization, and achievement of self or whatever. It's all about oneness, and it's all about removing the monkey mind and stuff like that. Well, I call bullshit. Fuck you guys. Fuck you. That just sounds like a boring day at the temple to me.
I'm refreshing.
I'm not impressed with the Easternism. I don't want to be conflicted and divided, and I don't want to be a mystically resonance amalgam of my paradoxes. It's like, hey everybody, become a spiritually resonant amalgam of your paradoxes. No, fuck you. Resolve that shit. Why?
You can't resolve a paradox.
Of course you
That's
can.
why it's a paradox.
No, I can resolve them all because they're functions of language. Stop being pussies.
Light and dark. It has to either be light or dark, but it sometimes is twilight.
No, I mean, that's a function of language. Language is an approximate, objective rendering of experiential fabric that is fundamentally unrenderable into concretely defined objects, but must be so rendered in order for communication to occur. And that's why we have cognitive functions that address the objective and subjective frames of reference, because those are the frames of reference that are inherently possible because of what I just said.
you look at it the other way, and the rest is only impossible because of the framework you're looking at it in.
No, I'm not saying that there's not experiential wholeness or oneness, and I'm not saying that language is the correct representation of that. I'm saying exactly the opposite. I'm saying, yeah, there is that experiential oneness, and yes, there is a metaphysical plane in which approximate representations of that experiential oneness become words, time objects that allow one to communicate ideas. Those ideas will never be they're not, you can't expect words to do things that words can't do. It's a sandwich is great at filling you up with food. It's not good at teaching you Latin. And so the problem is that people keep treating language like a sandwich that's supposed to teach them Latin. It doesn't do that. Your koans are stupid. Here's the thing. Hey, Buddhists, your koans are stupid. What's the sound of one hand clapping? Well, it's the sound of all the background noise, supposedly. But that's not the sound of one hand clapping. That's the sound of all the background noise. The sound of one hand clapping is like this.
I'm not really a Buddhist. I'm with you.
I know. I'm not saying you. I'm talking to you. I'm saying the Buddhists out there. You know, the myriad Buddhists who watch my channel. There's millions of them, Zach. Millions of Buddhists turn in every day to hear my wisdom on their shitty religion.
And they're all the same ENTP that's questioning it again.
Probably. Jeremy, are you typing something about this topic?
No, it's I don't know. I'm trying to sort it out for myself because I'm taking the devil's advocate against your hyper TI stance because I'm more, ambi-functional or whatever. Like I operate more on an FI basis.
I look, here's the thing. I seek and embrace FI experiences all the time, but I recognize the fact that I don't operate on an FI basis, meaning that ultimately, if someone goes, "Listen, Eric, but you said blah, and then today you said blah, but we had to assume blah, so blah 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 blah, and that means you're in the wrong here." At no point am I going to say, "But I really feel strongly about this." I'm going to either continue to make logical arguments, or I'm going to concede the point. And the reason is because ultimately I don't value my feelings like that. I don't value them above being fair and right, at all, ever. And you don't either, ultimately. You don't make those kind of arguments. Just because we have strong feelings doesn't mean we make those kind of arguments.
Right. Maybe this is the way it kind of makes sense for me. It's less about valuing feelings and more about valuing like the moment or whatever your subjective reality is, like the value yourself or the idea of yourself, which it would make sense that to operate in your point of least resistance would make sense as that because because it goes against sort of everything that's happening in your brain. To be consistent both with your brain and the point of least resistance could only exist in the exact moment.
Well,
but see, a paradox can only break for. It's really metaphysical and spiritual. Just try and help me out here.
Okay, well, I mean, I get what you're saying, that if in fact your thinkings and your feelings were aligned perfectly in the moment, then there would be, in theory, some co-experience of them. But that's not how it works, because they are adjudicating functions. In other words, one of them adjudicates shit by telling you, that hurt my feelings, therefore I'm mad at that person and he's a bad person. One of them adjudicates shit by saying, that was unfair because he said the opposite about himself yesterday and now he's saying the opposite about me today, and if he were right, it would be the same rule for both of us. It's you. Even if they agree with each other, you can't adjudicate concurrently both with the methodology that excises from you subjective concerns, and with the methodology that comprises those concerns. In other words, you can do them in succession. You can't do it in concurrent. You can't do it at the same time. Both determine the rightness of something by using the process that excises from yourself all of your subjective concerns. Let's pretend I had no feelings about this. I'm going to be disinterested. I'm going to be a perfect TI user, perfectly disinterested. It doesn't matter if I have I don't have any bias or anything. I can accept it if I'm wrong, you're wrong. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I just want to know who's actually wrong. That kind of thing. I want to remove all these personal interests from me. FI, on the other hand, comprises exactly that interest that TI removes to consider whether something's right or wrong. So you can't do them at the same time, because TI is literally, okay, let's turn off FI now and just use TI. Let's turn off FI so that we can use TI, because TI is disinterested analysis. And the reason it's disinterested is because it tries to make everything objective instead of subjective. So you could do them in rapid succession. You could do them in rapid succession in theory, but why would you want to vacillate back and forth between the naturally occurring process for us of considering things on grounds of fairness and extroverted feelings? That's why TI is always paired with extroverted feeling, is because we understand fairness on a logic level, and we understand positional equity on a feelings level. In other words, how other people perceive us, and how they position themselves against us or with us or whatever. That sort of stuff is where we do is why it's paired with TI, because it works under that conditionality approximate objective framework, whereas FI doesn't work under that framework.
Let's try it with another type, with an introverted type, and see if it holds up.
Okay.
Because to use FI as an example is kind of loaded, because it's a mode that most people live their life within, sort of.
Well, let's use TE and FE. Let's use TE and FE. FE says...
so an INTJ?
Well, let's look at the difference between an ISFJ and an ISTJ.
Okay.
And then you're looking at SITE, SIFE. FE says, let's make sure that what I'm prioritizing is the ability of each individual to instantiate their own existence to their pleasure in conjunction with others. So,
and this is FE as tool function, right?
Yeah, this is FE as tool function. Now, with FE as tool function, then a person sees activities, things they do, as expressions of either their SI, like expressions of their, I'm nesting, I'm going to put these things over here now. Like, Kimberly's always moving things around. There's no rhyme or reason to it. She's just like, now I'm going to put things here. Isn't that cute? Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. The thing is, what she's never doing is thinking to herself, how ought she do things more efficiently? Because let's say somebody were to pick up a chair and start moving it across the patio. If I were to see that and it would be, let's say it was Kimberly moving the chair, she'd do something like this, and she's not moved anything out of the way, she's just going to plow, like, try to lift it over things, and it's like, whoa, I'm going to try to squeeze it in there instead of being smart and moving shit out of the way first. And I can see she's going to knock some shit over. She's going to knock over that bottle, knock over the bong, whatever. It doesn't matter to her, because if I were to say, don't do it like that, she'd immediately say, I'll do it how I want to do it, because I'm having fun, and you stop telling me how to do shit, because she views it as...
that's where the T... Oh.
She views it as offensive to tell other people that when they're just having their fun, right? And so as a consequence, they've got TE polar. Now, in contrast, the TE person, they're focused on whether or not you're doing it right. They're on whether you're going to knock shit over. And so they're not focused on your feelings about that. The fact that you have your own reasons to do something, if it seems pretty obvious you're trying to move a chair across the patio, then your feelings on on how you want to do it stupid make no sense to the other person, the ISTJ, and they'll say, I mean, they'll be nice about it. They'll be like, "Can I help you do that?" But it'll annoy the shit out of them, right? Like, why is this person doing things so stupidly all the time? Why are they doing it so inefficiently? Why are they knocking shit over? And the reason is because if you've got that tool function, you're not paying attention to how other people are getting to express their own ontologies to their own benefit. And if you have FE, you're not paying attention to how they're not. So, yeah. So that's the extroverted tool functions there.
Well, and I'm thinking about, people who try to live within those two, like ISTJ friends of mine. One in particular who will try to sort of work within social graces without having any idea what they are,
right?
Or that's something you see a lot of INTJs talk about online, or ISFJs trying to accomplish stuff.
I've had Mega Bro will sometimes give an FE critique to something I say. It's almost never right. So it's like there are times when I'm expressing something because it's actually I'm voicing an insecurity here. It sounds confident, but really if you're really intuitive, you can see I'm being insecure. Sometimes it is like that. Sometimes it's like I'm just being kind of clumsy with the FE. I wasn't attending enough to sounding humble or whatever. So Megabro gets those wrong all the time. Like he'll say, "Oh, well, you were just doing that because you feel blah blah blah," and I'll say, "Well, that's not an unreasonable theory, but it's actually not correct in this instance at all. Here, if I were, and here's why, but I do recognize that I should have probably been nicer. See, the thing about INTJs, when they perceive me as being mean in some fashion, they really don't like that. And I think Megabro doesn't understand how that can happen. And so he tries to explain, well, why is it Eric would be mean? Well, because I'm pretty careless sometimes. It's really just that simple. Some of the time it's like I wasn't trying to be mean. I was just not caring very much and not trying very hard not to be mean. So, and then other times it actually is. If I'm attacking somebody vigorously, there's a decent chance I feel threatened by him at least a little bit, So there is definitely road to hoe there, but that's the sign of polar FE is they get it wrong. Like, you're being sarcastic. No, I was being serious. I think are you serious about that? No, I was joking. But anyway, I like INTJs a lot. I like hanging out with INTJs. I like hanging out with ISTJs. You feel so relaxed on FE grounds because they're not going to get offended over something stupid. And if you fuck up somewhere in the FE, they're even worse than you are. So it makes it like super easy to hang out with them.
Yeah, so long as you're not trying to communicate anything emotionally.
Right. As long as you're not super fuzzy about social graces. Like, I think it would drive Kimberly crazy because she's always like, she busted my chops yesterday because I interjected into a conversation. I didn't interrupt, but I chimed in after listening for a while and changed the subject without saying, just don't mean to change the subject here, or something like that, without giving her a little roadmap indicator. She busted my chops for not doing that. And I'm like, Kimberly, just fucking chillax. It's fine. Okay, any other last comments before we end this video? I think it's been a pretty good video. It was way more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, it went all over the place too. You could probably chop it up into 2 if you want.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.